Hi, and welcome to Politics by Numbers with Electoral Calculus. I'm Bryony Richter, Communications Director, and today I'm joined by Martin Baxter, founder of Electoral Calculus, and our guest, Tyron Surmon, Head of Research at Find Out Now. So we'll be discussing Find Out Now's polling and about their panel, and also digging into why some of the results are different from other pollsters and what that says about support for reform and Labour. So Tyron, to kick us off, tell us a little bit about Find Out Now's and how the panel works.
Sure. So yeah, my name's Tyron. I'm the head of research at Now, and we are both a pollster and a panel. And I think it's worth explaining the difference between that because a pollster generally uses, you could say, third-party sources of where the respondents actually come from. Whereas as a panel, Find Out Now, we are both where the respondents come from. Literally the website they log into, the place they do the surveys, but we're also the pollster who does the analysis, liaises with the end client. So we control every kind of part of that process. So regarding where our respondents come from, our consumer business is a free daily lottery website. So people log in each day, they try to see if they've won. And while they're there, we say, would you like to do a few questions? And this is a really great resource for us. Firstly, because we don't have to pay people. That's great. It means we can do much more polling than otherwise. And the fact that people didn't sign up to do surveys and we don't pay them to do them means we get people who are much less engaged, which is traditionally a problem with polling. You know, instead of getting people who have said, I want to give my opinion, I'm going to sign up to do a survey. Instead, we get people who say, you know what? If it's just a minute long, I'll answer your questions. And that's kind of like our superpower in the polling industry, I'd say, and one of the reasons why our results can be different on some metrics.
Or is it possible?
So at some level, we're trusting people to give us their truthful responses. But I think our advantage is when we ask someone about how they voted at the last election, we actually ask that question in, say, July of 2024. So it's interesting to see that when we ask people the question again, we can see their results have slightly changed. So there are people who previously voted Labour and have switched to Greens and now remember themselves as having voted Green last time. But no, we asked them 2 years ago. We can see exactly what they said. So that's just one of the big advantages of running a panel. Like we don't have to ask these questions every single time. And we've just got this rich source of historical data that we can always refer back to.
I think that's an important point, Tyron. Yeah, that there was a YouGov study, a funny one, that showed that people do misremember how they past voted if you ask them afterwards. And so I think having a panel is better than asking people the recall question.
Brilliant. Well, now let's get on to those numbers, Terence. Find Out Now recently they've leveled out in terms of where they polled reform. You're on the same kind of level as other pollsters, but obviously in the past you have kind of polled them higher. And now currently you've got Labour on 16%, which is 4 points lower than the national average on 20. Do you want to talk us through a wee bit about that and explain where those numbers are coming from and why they're a little bit different from other pollsters?
I think more that everyone else has got onto our level, perhaps. But, it depends where your starting point is. Sure. So in terms of our polling, there's three big differences, I'd say. Historically, Reform is slightly higher. And we had Labour significantly lower and also the Greens slightly higher than others. And there's lots of reasons for this. I think it mainly goes back to that engagement piece. So as a pollster, we're reaching people who don't normally sign up to polls, who are maybe less inclined to vote, whatever. And these are people which other pollsters find it very hard to reach. So on our Labour numbers, for example, I think a lot of this comes down to turnout. So when we run a voting intention poll, our assumed turnout at the end, i.e. how many people we think will come out to vote, is something like 55%. So for context, the last election was 60%. It seems to me to make sense that, this might have declined slightly. If you look at some other pollsters, they're in the 70s, which would be the highest turnout in decades. And this causes a lot of the Labour Reform difference because generally Reform voters are much more enthusiastic, as you'd expect, given, the times seem to be on their side. And if you assume a very high turnout, you kind of flatten out these differences, which brings Labour up, brings Reform down, and makes the difference between them much less. Where in our polling, we assume a much lower turnout, which means Reform voters being more enthusiastic, Labour voters being more likely to stay at home. These kind of peaks and troughs become much, much more visible in the final poll results.
So turnout is obviously going to be really important at the next election. You're touching on those points that if the Reform voters are enthusiastic, as you say, and they vote turn out more, and Labour voters a bit disillusioned turn out less, and the result could be very much one way, or it could be the other way around and it's different. So it's hard to know for sure, but yeah, I appreciate the efforts you're going to have a look at it.
Brilliant. And as well, going back to that Green, because obviously now you've got them in second place. Do you want to dive in a little bit more into those numbers there?
Yeah, so it's really interesting on the Greens actually that there are kind of two camps of pollsters. There are those which have them on kind of 18, 17, 16% in that category. So that's us, that's YouGov, that's Lord Ashcroft polls, that's Freshwater, a few others. And then you've got pollsters which have them on kind of like, 9, 10, 11, 12%. And truth be told, there doesn't seem to be a strong methodological reason for this. I used to work at a company called More in Common, which runs polls. Our methodology is very similar. They have the Greens on 10%, we have them on 18. So it's not the question wording, it's not how we sort the don't knows or whatever. I mean, I'm doing lots of research into this. My gut feels that it does have something to do with engagement again. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's the kind of your more average Labour voters who switched into the Green, where the more high engaged Labour voters are staying with the party. It could be something due to how the different age groups are weighted. I don't know, there's lots of kind of methodological factors. The article should be published sometime in the next year. Hopefully the next month, but I don't want to give any promises.
Brilliant. So one final question actually, Tyron. So we're going to go on to your track record. So, how you've held up over time, what your results have looked like in past elections, the locals, the generals, and why listeners should be confident in your results.
Sure. Well, I'd say you shouldn't have confidence in anyone's polling. You should see what the methodology is. You should see what the results are for previous elections. You should do your own research. So if we'll find out now, we've existed for quite a few years now, not quite a decade, but almost. But we only really started doing kind of more public polling, like voting intentions, since I was hired, which was just before 2024. In the 2024 election, we didn't do a specific voting intention series in our own name, just because, again, we were quite new to it. It seemed like, every pollster and his dog was publishing these voting intentions. So we kind of withdrew slightly. I did run a voting intention privately just the day before that election, just knowing that this would be useful for the future, which had we published it at the time, it would have had Reform too high, Labour dead on. It would have been kind of in the top third of pollsters. So we're reasonably happy with that. But it was only after that point that we decided, we're going to run these weekly. We're going to really try our hardest on the methodology. We're going to make, all the tinkering needed to be accurate. And the first test of this was the local elections, where we were closest of any pollster. But to be clear, only 3 pollsters seriously polled them. So best out of 3 rather than best out of like 30. And we came very close to that. And yeah, I guess the next challenge will be this May. And we're fairly confident that our results will be right. We made a series of changes.
Sorry to interrupt you there, Tom, but I think on the local elections, we worked with you on an MRP, and it came out, if anything, slightly low for Reform, but it correctly predicted that Reform were going to do really well. This is the May 25 election. So that, to me, was quite a good result.
Yeah, I think local elections are always a nightmare to predict, because even right now, where are the places having local elections? That's still slightly unclear. But one thing that's interesting is there are 2 different measures which try and translate local election votes to as if this election was held nationally. And if you compare those results, I think it's the projected national share and the national equivalent vote. The Find Out Now polling numbers from the week before were significantly closer than any other pollster. And obviously, a local election is not a general election, but I think had you only been following Find Out Now polling in the months previous, you'd have had a much better understanding and expectation for those local elections than the polling averages actually gave you.
Fantastic. Wow, brilliant. So it is going to be an exciting year ahead. I don't know, Martin, do you have any final thoughts for Tyron on that?
Well, I think, the big questions are going to be turnout and the strength of Reform and the Greens, which are the 2 driving parties at the moment. So I think we're all going to be watching the polls from Find Out Now and other pollsters as well in the months to come.
Yes, we're going to be watching that very closely. And of course, the local elections are coming up in the next couple of months. So that's it for this episode of Politics by Numbers. I want to say thank you very much to Martin and Tyron for your time. And thank you for listening, everybody. Thanks.
Bye-bye.